What if the world you think you know is built on half-truths and hidden assumptions? We trust our senses, sight, hearing, touch, yet deep down, there's a nagging suspicion. Could everything we perceive be a cleverly crafted illusion? Carl Jung believed that the most unsettling deceptions aren't the ones fed to us by others, but the ones we create within ourselves. It's not just about seeing or hearing incorrectly. It's about our minds twisting reality into a shape that suits our unconscious desires and fears. Ask yourself, how many times have you been absolutely certain of something, only to discover later you were dead wrong? And worse, how many times did you accept a distorted reality without even realizing it? So, if our senses and beliefs can be manipulated by our own unconscious mind, what's the real problem here? The issue isn't just that we might see or hear things incorrectly. It's that these internal distortions can guide our most significant choices without our awareness. Think of it this way. Every time you form an opinion, judge another person, or decide on a life path, you assume you're acting on truthful information. But what if the foundation of that decision is warped by biases you've never confronted? Carl Jung argued that our minds don't merely reflect reality, they shape it through the lens of our inner world. This means we're constantly running the risk of building our lives on assumptions and half-truths. We might fall in love with illusions, wage battles against imagined enemies, or chase goals that don't truly align with who we are. Why is this so disturbing? Because we often have no idea it's happening. Our perception feels so real, so immediate, that we rarely stop to question it. And when we do, we often rely on the very same distorted perceptions to judge whether they're accurate. It's like trying to read fine print with a cracked lens. You'll see something, but it won't be what's truly on the page. In other words, the core issue is this. We trust our minds to show us the world as it is, but according to Jung, our minds are just as likely to show us the world as we secretly want or fear it to be. This disconnect can lead to misunderstandings, self-deception, and even larger societal problems if collective biases take root. Before we unravel how our minds can deceive us, let's take a moment to meet the man who dared to look behind the curtain of human perception. Carl Gustav Jung. Born in Switzerland in 1875, Jung set out to explore the human psyche with a curiosity that went far beyond the boundaries of conventional psychology. He was once a close collaborator of Sigmund Freud, yet he broke away to forge his own path, founding what we now call analytical psychology. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Jung believed the unconscious wasn't just a dumping ground for repressed memories. It was a vast, living entity filled with archetypes and symbols shared by all of humanity. Why does this matter to our discussion? Because Jung didn't just observe behavior from the outside. He peered into the darkest recesses of the mind to uncover forces that shape our thoughts without our knowing. He saw illusions not as tricks of the light, but as manifestations of deeper psychological realities, collective influences, personal shadows, and archetypal patterns embedded in our very being. Jung's lifelong mission was to make the unconscious conscious. To him, only by exploring these hidden realms could we hope to understand why we perceive the world the way we do, and how those perceptions might be lying to us. His radical ideas stirred controversy, but they also opened new doors. Today, his concepts remain influential in therapy, philosophy, literature, and even pop culture. By diving into Jung's work, we aren't just skimming old textbooks. We're venturing into a mind that invites us to question everything we accept as reality. And that, perhaps more than anything else, is why Jung remains a beacon for anyone determined to see beyond the surface of life. So what happens when we peek beneath the surface of our everyday experiences? According to Jung, reality isn't something we simply observe. It's something we actively shape through our inner world. In his view, our conscious mind takes in raw data from the senses, but it's our unconscious mind that interprets and colors these signals, often without our even realizing it. Imagine looking through tinted glasses. You might think you're seeing the world as it truly is, when in fact, every detail is filtered through that tinted lens. Jung argued that the tint comes from our personal experiences, our deep-seated complexes, and, perhaps most powerfully, our collective unconscious. These hidden forces guide how we piece together reality, how we assign meaning to events, and how we form beliefs about ourselves and the world. But here's the catch. Most of the time, we don't know we're wearing these glasses. Our default assumption is that what we see is objective truth. This can lead to profound misunderstandings, both within ourselves and between each other. We might insist we're right, when, in fact, we're simply filtering reality through our private biases. Jung's radical twist was to suggest that we can never fully escape these biases. They're woven into our humanity. Yet, becoming aware of them is the first step toward truly expanding our perspective. It's not about discarding our subjective lens entirely, because, let's face it, we can't, but about recognizing it for what it is. Now, let's shine a light on a concept that's both unsettling and empowering: Jung's idea of the shadow. In Jungian psychology, the shadow represents all those traits, emotions, and impulses that we've pushed into the basement of our minds because we can't, or won't, accept them in ourselves. Think of it as a locked room full of qualities we'd rather pretend don't exist. But here's the kicker. Just because we lock something away doesn't mean it disappears. In fact, Jung believed our shadow silently influences our thoughts, beliefs, and actions from behind the scenes. It's like a hidden puppeteer tugging at the strings of our reactions, coloring how we perceive people and situations, even as we tell ourselves we're being rational. One of the most dangerous ways the shadow distorts our reality is through biases. We often despise or criticize traits in others that actually live in our own shadow. For example, if we secretly harbor anger or jealousy we refuse to acknowledge, we might become hypercritical of these qualities in friends, co-workers, or even strangers on the internet. We're essentially fighting a battle with ourselves, but we project it onto the outside world. This isn't just a theoretical concept, it has real-world consequences. From personal relationships to societal conflicts, the unacknowledged shadow can fuel judgment, prejudice, and misunderstanding. We end up thinking we're responding to some external truth, when in fact, we're wrestling with our own repressed emotions. The good news? Jung believed that by confronting our shadow, by recognizing and owning those disowned parts of ourselves, we can free our perception from at least some of these distortions. It's not a painless process. It requires brutal honesty, introspection, and sometimes the help of a therapist or guide. But in doing so, we begin to see the world, and ourselves, with clearer eyes. Beyond our personal unconscious, Jung proposed an even deeper layer of the psyche, one shared by every human being on the planet. He called this the collective unconscious, and at its core lie the archetypes, universal symbols and themes that transcend time, culture, and geography. Think of them like blueprint patterns that shape how we perceive and interpret the world. The hero, the wise old man, the nurturing mother. These archetypes appear in myths, fairy tales, and religious stories across civilizations. According to Jung, they're hardwired into our collective psyche, guiding our reactions to life's challenges and triumphs before we're even aware of it. But here's why archetypes matter to our question of whether reality might be a lie. They color how we perceive everything. When we encounter a new person or situation, our subconscious mind might unconsciously classify it through these archetypal patterns. We might see someone as a villain or a mentor, project our hopes onto them as a savior, or dismiss them as a trickster, all based on archetypes embedded in our collective unconscious. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It helps us make sense of a chaotic world. But it does mean that we could be filtering reality through deeply ingrained narratives that aren't always accurate. We might see conflict where there is none, or trust someone who merely fits an archetype we're subconsciously drawn to. Worse yet, entire societies can become captive to archetypal myths, shaping collective beliefs and actions without realizing it. From political movements to pop culture phenomena, the power of archetypes can unite or divide us on a grand scale, all under the banner of, "This is how the world really is." Jung's message isn't to reject these archetypes. They're part of our psychological inheritance. Instead, it's to recognize them. Because the moment we become aware that our minds automatically reach for these timeless patterns, we gain the power to question whether our perception of reality is truly ours, or just the echo of an ancient story whispered to us by the collective unconscious? Have you ever thought about someone you haven't seen in ages, only for them to call or text moments later? Or maybe you've picked up a random book, and it spoke precisely to an issue you've been wrestling with. According to Carl Jung, these aren't just happy accidents. They might be synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that suggest there's more to our reality than cold, hard causality. Jung believed that synchronicities happen when our inner psychological state aligns with external events in a way that defies simple explanation. Rather than being pure chance, these experiences can feel charged with significance, as though the universe itself is communicating with us. Whether you interpret them spiritually, psychologically, or even skeptically, the fact remains. Synchronicities often jolt us into questioning how we view reality. In Jung's framework, these events can act as gateways to the unconscious, prompting us to explore hidden desires or fears that might be influencing our perceptions and choices. When a synchronicity appears, it may be our psyche's way of saying, "Pay attention. There's something important here." It challenges the belief that we live in a purely mechanistic world, hinting instead that our minds and the external environment could be linked at a deeper level. But here's the twist. Synchronicities, like our other perceptual distortions, can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, they can spur personal growth, guiding us to confront what we usually bury in our unconscious. On the other, if we become too enamored with every coincidence we see, we might fall into confirmation bias, seeing patterns where there are none, and further distancing ourselves from reality. Still, for Jung, the takeaway is profound. Perhaps our inner world isn't just a mirror reflecting the outside. Maybe, in ways we don't fully understand, it's an active participant in shaping our experiences, nudging us toward insights we might otherwise miss. If that's true, then every so-called coincidence has the potential to expose the fragile line between what we think is real and what lies beyond our conscious grasp. By now, it's clear that Carl Jung's ideas on perception challenge us to look at reality with fresh eyes, or better yet, to realize we've been wearing blinders all along. From personal shadows to archetypal blueprints, from hidden biases to those uncanny synchronicities, the ways in which our minds shape our worldview are as subtle as they are powerful. But what does this mean for our everyday lives? For one, it implies that our most cherished beliefs might not be as objective as we think. When we understand just how much our unconscious influences our perception, we can no longer claim with absolute certainty that our version of the truth is the only one. That humility alone can diffuse arguments, open our minds, and foster genuine empathy in our relationships. On a broader scale, entire communities and societies can be swayed by collective illusions, shared archetypes, or mass projections that become cultural norms. History is filled with cautionary tales of movements fueled by misperceptions or fear-based shadows cast upon entire groups of people. Jung's work suggests that recognizing these patterns isn't just about personal growth, it's about social responsibility. By facing our collective shadows and questioning our assumptions, we take a step toward reducing conflict and misunderstanding on a global level. Yet there's a flip side. Some might find all this talk of illusions, hidden biases, and archetypes overwhelming or even nihilistic. If we can't trust our perceptions, how do we move forward? Jung would argue that awareness is our greatest ally. When we become conscious of the forces shaping our view of reality, we start to reclaim our agency. We can challenge old beliefs, identify what truly resonates with us, and cultivate a more authentic way of seeing the world. In short, the implications are both sobering and liberating. Sobering because we realize we've been living in a mental house of mirrors, and liberating because, at last, we can see the reflections for what they are, distortions rather than immutable facts. That understanding is the first step to genuine transformation, both within ourselves and the broader society we inhabit.